the butterfly effect impacts all of us beyond science in terms of how it impacts our life, how it can impact our business. Uh, so it's reasonable to assume that most of the audience is already aware of the theoretical part of what it means. But I like to also give some real life examples from our journey of last 14 years building Policy Bazaar. If we look at butterfly effect, there are a few important aspects that we need to understand. First of all, when we talk of the butterfly effect, it's all about the consequences. It describes how very small things can have great impact, which basically means that we can't ignore the small things. The event itself may not have very direct impact on the outcome, but it can be the catalyst which sets the ball rolling. And as I said, it's not limited to just science and natural systems, but it's applicable to all complex systems, which are non-linear and unpredictable. It is as applicable to business as anywhere else, because it suggests that small initial actions can yield great rewards in the future. Now, if we look at our own company, which is a marketplace, and marketplace inherently are complex with many interconnected pieces, where you have customers on one side and insurance companies or partners on the other side. In such a scenario, even a small change in the input variable emanating from controllable, such as marketing, communication, or spend, or uncontrollable, such as any change in government policy, can have very large consequences. I'd like to give a very apt example here of what happened in August-September 2019 period, where in India, Ministry of Transport changed a small change in Motor Vehicle Act. And the fine for driving vehicle without valid insurance went up drastically by almost 10 times. Now, this is such a small note to the overall guidance, as in theory, all the vehicles have insurance when they ply on the road. But in reality, there are significant numbers of two-wheelers roaming around without insurance. And now, because the cost of the fine became much more than cost of buying the insurance, a lot of people wanted to buy this insurance. All said and done, all human beings try to be as rational as they can be. Now, there's a small technical point here, because if you do not have a policy, then you have to go for a physical survey of the vehicle, which is a cumbersome process. But we had built out a service where you can buy a policy on the platform without going through that pain of physical survey. And in that particular month, we saw our volumes jump almost 8x for that particular product line. Now, we could not have predicted this, but it will give you an idea of how a small and seemingly unrelated input variable change had a much larger business ramification for us. Now, if we look at any system, especially natural systems, they are by nature non-linear and chaotic. You look at weather system, very, very tough to predict. You look at any ecosystem, it's not very easy. It's not that everything is lined up and one thing will lead to another thing. So just to think about it, you may have seen dominoes lined up with starting one being very, very small, ending up to a very large domino where the small push to the smallest piece ends up making the largest piece fall down. Now that's a linear impact. That's a leverage. That's not butterfly effect. So this is very important for us to understand. The outcome is unpredictable, and a small event does not create the leverage here for something big. So what does it mean for all of us? First of all, we must be always on the lookout for opportunities, however small, as the consequence cannot be predicted all the time. The more opportunities we create, the probability of something leading to large outcome increases. You may have heard stories about someone feels they are lucky or someone feels they are not as lucky in life. Now, if we all get lucky, we keep an open mind and create as many positive starting situations as possible. Sometimes we all call this a serendipity. If I think back, there have been numerous such occasions in our journey as well, where we were looking at hiring a particular person, or we were looking at a particular regulation to change, which has impacted our business. The whole existence of Policy Bazaar actually can be attributed to such an event, which is totally unrelated and very trivial. So just stepping back a little bit, we started our business in 2008. And at that time, we were wrapping up our old business. Around the same time, I, along with a colleague, attended a conference in Delhi, which was focusing on startups and VC funding. There was a gentleman from InfoEdge who was a speaker at that conference. I casually mentioned this to my business partner in the evening because he was in London at that time, that, Hitesh was there and he gave a very good talk. He said, "Oh, wow, he's my batchmate from IT Delhi, so why don't you say hello to him tomorrow?" Now, this small incident set off a chain of events, and InfoEdge actually ended up becoming a seed investor for us. Now, if you think back, InfoEdge did not have a fund at that point, and we would have never reached out to them, but for the fact that I attended that conference, happened to know that person, happened to discuss that with my partner, and everything lined up. But it's very easy to see this in hindsight. But while we were going to that conference, we could not have predicted this. So this is a very, very, very apt example of how the whole butterfly effect can play out in the context of life or business. When we are looking out for such opportunities, it always helps to have a positive mindset. If we tend to be anxious, we'll miss out huge amount of such opportunities. We are all born as humans, so reality is we are all lucky. But there was a study done by Dr. Richard Wiseman. He was a psychologist long back. He's done a lot of work on why people believe they are lucky or not lucky. And in that particular study, he set up a situation where people who consider them lucky and people who do not consider themselves lucky went to the same starting point. So they were asked to go to a nearby cafe to have a coffee. And unknown to them, there were a £5 note placed on the way to the coffee. And there was a senior business person who was sitting inside alone. Now, the person who considered himself to be lucky was able to see this £5 note. He was able to also strike up a conversation with that person and exchange details with him. Whereas the person who considered himself to be not as lucky could not see that. He was lost in his own thoughts, maybe anxiety, maybe whatever. Now, the reality is that both had the same situation given to them, but only one could feel that he is lucky. We in our own company has been able to hire a lot of people when we have started interacting with them without any plans to fill a particular role. But once you start talking to them in a situation which sometimes is not a very normal office interview situation, maybe you met them in some get together, maybe you have met them in some travel, but you end up getting them on board, and they have been very critical part of our journey as we build this company. If we look at whether we can predict the impact of butterfly effect, obviously it's not possible, but it's quite logical in hindsight. If we look at the teachings that we get from Hindu holy texts of Gita or philosophy of Buddhism, it's almost very, very similar to some extent, that you can only do what you can do, and the result is not in your control. We can control our actions, but outcome is not predictable. So some of you may think that if we cannot predict what's going to happen, why should we put that effort? That would be a fallacious thought. The outcome of no action is obviously zero. However, outcome of a positive input has the possibility of being non-zero. Again, let me add an example of how when you're taking a decision, it's not very easy. Post IPO in November 2021, we have got decent amount of cash on our balance sheet. Now, there's a question we face internally and even externally sometimes, that what do you do with the cash? If we use this, increase the burn, how would the market react to the same? On the other hand, if we do not use this cash, then after a few years, the same people may turn around and ask us that you have been not experimental enough. So today, when we are sitting here, we do not have the right answer of how things will play out. But I'm sure whatever decision we take today, after a few years, when we look back, we'll be able to figure out whether that was right or wrong. But it's very, very tough to predict when you are in the middle of a situation. So just, you have to do what you believe is right. There's another aspect of butterfly effect, which is interconnectivity. That's also very, very important because an individual's action can have ramification on a wider population. Just think about how much impact a political leader or a corporate leader's actions have on the state of the world or their company or anyone around them. Now, even as individuals, we all have the power to take decisions which can alter the trajectory of human civilization. You've seen one of the most iconic pictures of Tank Man for Tiananmen Square protest of China in 1989, where one individual stood in front of the column of tank. The butterfly effect asks us to be thoughtful with our decisions because we never know what the consequences of those decisions are. Even a single straw not used by us will add to something good. So it can be incredibly motivating as we all hold the power to define the environment, climate, government, society, liberties, everything around us. We, as I mentioned, we live in an interconnected or rather a hyper-connected society today. Most of the organizations and markets behave like networks, and that ends up making them more chaotic than earlier, and usually they're not linear. The whole of social media ends up amplifying the impact, both in terms of scale and acceleration of timeline. We have all seen content which have gone viral, and the same content comes back to us multiple times within a very short time frame. But it's very tough to predict which content will go viral. So, most of the current business thinking and economic modeling is based on predictable or rational human behavior. We will need to update our thinking and decision making once we understand how powerful the butterfly effect can be. It's just a name, but the reality is our actions of what we do today, however small, will have an impact of how our world is going to shape over next many, many years. And it should make us more humble towards the whole unknown nature of life. I would wish all of you to savor such small wins and hope these will lead to an awesome outcome for you as you grow into your careers. Thank you very much.